Welcome to the Love Pod, where inspiration, vision, and real connection come alive. Wherever you are, you belong here.
Welcome to the Love Pod, everyone. My name is Nathaniel. I'm your host for today. I'm so pleased to welcome a good friend and really inspiring builder and creator, Bill Hazelton, who is the founder, creator, and seeker of SelfScale, another fellow community builder on School as well. And Bill, I understand that your spiritual awakening has helped transform the way you see your purpose and your service. And you are really about empowering our authentic voice to take on a whole new level of impact through the conscious, awakened use of AI. And I know you probably have other language around this. We were just having such an interesting conversation right before the show about the difference between building AI from these perspectives. You mentioned like the contrast of building AI models with regard to heat compared to light, and I find that super fascinating. To me, you're one of the most interesting people that I've had conversations around AI with, and we've had the privilege of having some really interesting pioneers and things on the show. So I'm really pleased to have you on the show. I feel really honored to have you here, and I'd just love to welcome you to introduce more about yourself and why are you doing what you do.
Well, I first want to extend my gratitude to you, my friend. I consider it a real privilege and an honor to call you a friend. And I'll start maybe with a little bit of context about sort of how we met. And I think that's a really important context is that I think we were kind of magnetized in a lot of ways in terms of how we had some some friends, some mutual friends that have were sort of the the reason that our paths kind of crossed together. But one of the things that I am drawn to is this idea of service. And really, I've kind of had to rebuild my life around this idea around service. And I have just to give you, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I think it would be important, just in terms of background, is, I had a long career, 30-year career in digital marketing. I was, one of the first AdWords customers. I've been doing this a very, very long time. So I have a lot of experience in this ecosphere. And it's given me perspective, and especially with respect to my background and my history, because I come from, a good family, but also, I've been in recovery for over 30 years. I was a wild one when I was a kid, and I'm a very adventurous person in all respects, both personally and professionally. But what that sort of led me to was this place where I had to make a decision. And in one of those places in my life, I had to make a decision about what I was doing with my life in my early 20s because I was dying, and I
Hmm.
had to make that decision. And it really it opened this door to this idea of service as a lifestyle,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
as something that is an elective or is optional, but as a core principle of your life to really serve as not to get a result, but really as a wiring and a lifestyle that directs all things in your life. And believe me, when I showed up, Nathaniel, I did not show up waving the flag for service.
Hmm.
My mindset was, where's mine?
Hmm.
How do I get mine? And I had very much, in my early years, had very much sort of a me, myself, and I kind of mentality. And my journey in recovery has really opened this lens to the idea that service is such a core, I think, spiritual principle. But I
Hmm.
found it in a unique way. I didn't find it in a church. I didn't find it in a book. I found it with an experience, my own kind of personal experience that opened the door to this idea. And being of service has really transformed my life because it's really given me this understanding of what it can do for me in all respects, personally and professionally.
Mm.
So, and that's how I think our sort of, our ways of thinking have sort of, come together in that way, as this idea of service as a lifestyle, as really a principled architecture for how you live. And but I also think it has very much practical perspectives in all areas in your
Yeah.
life. I think sometimes we get lost in this idea of, well, I don't have the time. But my experience has really led me to this notion that being of service opens doors that you would not be able to access if
Mm.
you were not of service.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for me, that has been my spiritual path. It's been this experience of seeing not only myself, but others who live this life of service
Mm.
and have these unbelievable lives that just unfold, because of their willingness
Mm.
to say, yes, I will help. And that may sound like an oversimplified version of how to live life, but that's the place I come from today. I
Yeah.
come from this place of how can I be helpful? That's my prayer in
Yeah.
the morning. It's not that simplified, but that's basically the paraphrase version of what I do when I engage, when I'm up in the morning. That's what I'm asking, is what can I do to be helpful in my life? And it's really led to this place.
Mm.
I got to this place, and with respect to this product, I think it was really divinely inspired. That's really the bottom line, is that I came to this place in my career where I was asking that question of how can I use my experience to be most helpful, to be most useful? And that was really what sparked the idea of SelfScale. And for me, this conversation is really, I think, more exciting as it relates to the spiritual side, because from a business perspective, I think it's certainly interesting, but I don't know where it's going to go.
Hmm.
It's a pre-revenue company. I mean, we have a whole, boatload of people are trying it, but it's still kind of in that we're in the middle of building, and it's exciting to me, but I don't have it figured out. I'm a first time SaaS product builder, and this is just I'm a newbie,
Mm.
when it comes to this. So I've really had to kind of dedicate myself to learning and owning, what I don't know, which is a lot at this point. But really, that the starting point has really been how can in what ways can I bring people together?
Mm.
What, in my experience, and I have, years of community building experience in recovery, offline, online. It's just threaded its way throughout my entire career. This idea of community building, which is really just, it's just bringing people together,
Yeah.
you know. And so I was thinking about that with my experience on school. I was, how can I do this in a way that's really going to be most helpful to people? And I started to think about this thing I was having a problem with, which was, I need more, I need to, I have ideas that I want people to hear about, but I don't have the time to be a social media guy. I just, making videos and posts and all this stuff. And I just had this problem where I was like, I just don't have the time to be able to do this. And that's where the idea came from. Was it started with this notion about, how can I bring people together? And so it started with this thinking of being able to use AI, the tools, as a way to help people um, identify their voice. Because one of the things that I hear, and my biggest complaint is when you see all of the content that's out there, it just sounds like this sea of sameness.
Hmm.
It's just so homogenized, and there's just so much of it on school, everywhere you go. It's just and that to me was a real problem because it really kind of strips out the fabric of personality and voice and the things that are really important, at
Hmm.
least from my vantage point, I was missing those the rough edges that I was seeing in content. It just looked all too identical for
And
me.
you can
So
feel there's a feeling that's missing too in a lot of it, right? I
yes,
mean, whether you call it AI slop or I think, one of the most interesting things I find about you, we were talking earlier in the call, is that, the amount of heart and dedication I see you putting into building this product to help people literally amplify their voice, which is so interesting because at the end of each show, I always ask people if they had a magical megaphone and they could talk to everyone on the planet, what would they say? So you can think about that for a while. I don't usually tell people in advance, but so it's I feel like the concept is so important, and you and I having dialogue about you know amplifying those important voices. And I appreciate what you said about me, in my sharing with you my spiritual journey and my perspectives on life, and also my perspectives on AI and how I see, it's it's rooted in the same electromagnetic stuff that we are. Everything I think comes from the same stuff, and yet if it is um, pointed in a direction to serve egoic needs, or it's just left to this like total business focus of like how much money can it make and how much money can I make using it, and if we stay there as a species, I think we're in trouble because that separates all of us, and it continues the perpetuation of competition that is unhealthy when it's interfering with the infinite game of life, right? So I
right.
really appreciate your. I mean, every conversation I had, you're telling me how much you're working on iterating the model and how much you're putting into it, and I feel like that speaks to your heart. And what we were talking about earlier in the show, I think, is really important. This because the conversation that precedes people's utilization of AI often isn't there on a deeper level, like to talk about the fears, to talk about the apprehensions, to talk about that distinction between general AI voices and more refined uses as a co-creative tool, which I feel like is what you're building in its essence. It's a co-creative tool. It's not something that
Yeah.
just generates for you. It really takes your unique, like you say it, voice DNA. I Yeah. Would you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like it's such an important conversation piece.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And I think that's really the core differentiator of what we're trying to do. Initially, it started out as, oh, maybe we can build it as a generation tool. Well, at the end of the day, nobody cares. If people want to just generate a blog post, they'll go to ChatGPT and do what they do. But what I have found is that what's missing is all the rough edges, all the rough personality edges. So how I speak, the way I talk, the words I use, the spaces I use in my phrasing, all of that is a mapping. Okay. It's your voice blueprint, what we refer to as your blueprint. Okay. So it's how you speak. Okay. So that is totally missing. And so being able to map that is really at the center of where we feel that we can be a differentiator, is to
Mm.
really identify and elevate your voice. Okay. So that's sort of part number one. And it's complex,
Yeah, I can
just
imagine.
adding some adjectives and because there is diversity in language and usage and phraseology, and it's a very sophisticated modeling that is required to be able to do that. But that's really only the first layer
Mm.
of being able to identify what that footprint of how you speak and who you are, what that really is. And so at its core, it really requires what we refer to as, and I'm sort of tired of hearing about this, but signal, which is
Okay.
really just data information
Yep.
that can be used to really identify this mapping. Okay.
Yep.
But that really at the end of the day, that we have to get right, and that's the part that I've been working so hard on is unless you come to me and say, use the tool and go, wow, that is definitely me, man. It's just not, it's not good enough.
Mm.
So that's where it has to be. It has to be, that is, when you put in an idea and it spits out a YouTube video or LinkedIn post or school or whatever, um, when you see that, you go, that's definitely me.
Mm.
So saying, well, that kind of sounds like me, not good enough. Chat GPT can do that, Claude, all the tools can, it's kind of sounds like me, not good enough. So to be useful, it has to be a very well-defined, accurate map
Mm.
of you. Now that's part one. So in addition to that, we talked about this earlier, but the difference between how social media optimizes and my vision for what self-scale can really be, or what I really want it to be, is this amplifier of your uniqueness.
Mm.
Okay. And we're going to talk about ideas and how that maps to your voice and how to get use out of that. But it's really got to start there. Um, but underneath that, you really have to have um, a centerpiece for your amplification. And social media is really gotten, that's what they do. They optimize for engagement.
Mhm.
Okay, so the more engagement that you see, likes, comments, and shares, the more visibility you get. It's a very it's gotten more simplified, but it's very complex. The engagement modeling for these channels is very complex, but um, self-scale is really built to optimize for uniqueness. So that's what we're trying to do is to really optimize for who you are,
Yeah.
how you speak, what you're about. And they run counter to each other. So that's the challenge for me is social media optimizes for heat
Yeah.
and self-scale is really built and optimized for light. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're profoundly different prospects and ideas, but here's how I reconcile that is we start with who you are, but then using the data that we have that you provide, and that could be anything. That could be the more that you give us, the better it is. But it could start with just a couple of, school posts or LinkedIn articles or a YouTube video, or it can be, it doesn't have to be a whole lot, but the more that you give it, the more precise it becomes. And so what we do with this idea is we pair it with ideas that are important to you, but also to the markets that you operate in.
Mm.
Okay. So you've got your voice, and then you have products and services or communities that you're servicing and that you want to speak to. So we pair your voice blueprint with those communities, with those audiences, and we define an audience as an ideal customer.
Okay.
That's how we define it. Um, and then what is important to those ICPs? So it might sound complicated, but we simplify it in that we're basically triangulating your voice with ideas that are important in your market, in your community, for your ICP, for your specific target, whatever that might be. And then we build this content in your voice around those ideas. And they might be your ideas, but part of the application is really built to help you identify ideas and sentiments that are really important to you, but also to your audience.
Hmm.
So things that you might not be seeing, that your community is talking about, or that the market that you're focused on is talking about. So that's another analysis that we do that brings in these ideas that your community or your audience is talking about.
I think that's
Um,
super interesting. And, from a leverage point of entrepreneurism, I mean, that's like really valuable on one hand. And on the other hand, you know, I've contemplated a lot about what an edge AI looks like. And what I mean by that is an AI that really knows you so intimately well, it can even like, it can predict some of your needs. And I think, it's like the Jarvis of AI, and I feel like personalized AI is definitely the future of AI, not generalized AI. And something that can work with you on inspired projects. And I feel like that's some of the excitement around like Claude Code and stuff, as people are becoming much more autonomous in what they can create. And I feel like that's going to have huge implications. So like the natural question also is that this is also pushing on a fear for people too, right, Bill? In terms of like, if you have something that can emulate you in such a clear and precise way, it really makes that ability to discern something that someone really wrote or something that someone really recorded much less, much harder to do. It naturally leads to the question of, like ethics and stuff. And I know that you are driven by this innate desire to serve and to serve that emergence of authenticity and that you've expressed like genuine concern about AI. And you probably have more to talk about the model, but I just think this is a good point to bring that up. If you want to share a little bit about
oh,
what's
absolutely.
what's your come from and like what's your why behind doing this.
Well, really at the end of the day, for me, it's about seeing the opportunity that people might not be seeing, in that this is really a way to elevate your differences,
Hmm.
and to amplify your differences. And my argument is this is a very unique point in time that allows us to use these tools that scare the crap out of everybody, and myself included. So very, I have a profound sense of responsibility that somebody like myself needs to operate with. So that sense of ethics and duty as a responsibility are really important. And I think there's nothing more important than being able to really understand, identify, and map who you are and what makes you unique. I think I feel like it's a responsibility, and I can help people do that, to really identify what that is, who they are, and then use that as your unfair advantage. All of
Hmm.
those things that you think, people don't care about. Well, what people have to understand is, and I'm going to talk about the algorithm stuff again, but the way that the algorithms and these companies are working now is that they're already filtering out all the crap. They're already doing it.
Hmm.
So all the chat GPT slop, all that stuff that's just sort of cut and paste is is really one of the things that the filters that all of these companies are using, all of them, and I have data to support that this filtering is already happening. So it really requires your unique perspective. And there's this notion, this idea called net information gain.
Hmm.
Okay. And the easiest way to explain that is just what makes what you're talking about, wherever you're talking about it, on TikTok or school or wherever, what makes it unique, or what in that information or in that discourse is a net gain of information? Are you just
Mm.
talking about what everybody else is talking about,
Yeah.
or is published 1,000 times already?
Yeah.
And they're already doing this. So the reason I'm bringing this to the fore is that it's a really important aspect of how to use the tools in a way that can help you really define yourself uniquely. But it's really not an option. You really have to do that, because without it, what you say is just going to be ignored anyway.
Mm. Mm.
So it's a
Yeah.
really important concept to understand algorithmically, but from a net gain perspective as a user, is these are things that can really um, help us to amplify our own voice and our own ideas, that are really, that's what this is about, is how do we do that? How do we capture who we are in a way that's going to give me, that unique perspective, that unique vantage of who I am and what I represent. And it's really important. And in my mind, this is really a countervailing force to what these AI tools are really trying to do, which is
Mm.
homogenize information and homogenize humanity. And I'm fearful about that.
Mm. Mm.
So using the tools in a way that allows us to identify our uniqueness and our authenticity, to elevate and amplify that uniqueness and authenticity, that, in my eyes, is an edge.
Yeah.
That
That
gives you an
that is
edge.
an
And
edge.
you've done this yourself.
Yeah. There's so much here, Bill. Really important conversations. And as you're talking, there's a few things that stood out to me. One is I remember when I was on the island, I found this book. I'm a bit of a book magnet. Books find me, and I probably have stored too many books in my day. And one of them was called The Science of Fascination. And I thought that was a really interesting book. I never really dove deeply into it, but this idea of what makes you fascinating to others. It was like a
Mm,
guidebook on that. And similarly, in the same vein, this is kind of what that is. I also feel like we've had a guest on here, and I've had the direct experience of using AI because I'm aware it's connected to all human knowledge. So I use it more as a mirror, and in terms of helping me see maybe some biases or blind spots that I might have, and to help me on my journey of seeing myself more clearly. And I feel like this tool, as it develops, can be really profoundly used in that way as well, to help with the other side of AI, which isn't discussed as much, is AI as a collaborator, but also as a mirror for humanity, because it has access to so many data points and even other user information and things. So I feel like it's what I love about you is you're coming from a place of service and responsibility, and doing what you can um, to raise the standards of how we're using AI, and also amplifying important voices, because as we know as entrepreneurs, it's so easy to get lost in the noise. I mean, Julie and I have done probably about 130 episodes now of our podcast, and we have 100 subscribers of our channel, right? So, and we've had some really deep, profound conversations. Now I'm doing more, my own content and shorts and stuff, so we know that will expand over time, but it's just evidence about like how much noise is out there to really get a voice through, to really amplify a voice. There's a lot of nuance, and like you said, one of my views, is I find everyone interesting, whether they think they're not, or they are, is irrelevant, because I feel like we have such unique journeys. And from a spiritual, like a higher perspective, I would say that we all add to the wholeness of consciousness from our unique perspective and the unique gifts that we've, gathered, and all of it comes down to uniqueness. I think consciousness in and of itself values uniqueness. That's why we have such diversity of life. So I can understand your fear about the homogenization of a human, the human collective and also of humankind in general. I mean, I don't know if you grew up with watching like Star Trek Next Generation like me, like the
Oh, of
Borg is
course.
just a like it's probably one of the scariest villains of all space zombies that are all hive-minded. It's just so terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of ways, that's sort of the analog. I mean, that's really, the basis that I'm coming from, that I come from with this is really I'm an underdog story. I came from literally very modest. Basically, it came from nothing, and have always felt like an underdog in my life. I've always felt like that, and this is just my perspective, but this is what I feel like. The whole idea started with this notion about your story matters
Mm,
and your ideas matter. Okay, just because you don't have a lot of listeners doesn't mean that your story is not important and that
mhm,
your ideas are not important. Okay, and this is an idea. These are things that came through me, not
mhm,
from me.
mhm.
And we've talked about that a lot, but that that
Yep.
that notion really just rang through me. And I highlighted that because this is really what it's about is a mechanism, a bridge to really amplify the voices of people that matter. And I feel like there's and from a business perspective, I've had people ask me, "Oh, agencies and influencers and all," and okay, I hear that, but that's not where I'm coming from with respect to the spirit of the idea. This is
Mhm,
about the little guy.
mhm.
This is about a tool, and that again is I'm optimizing for light,
Yeah.
not for heat. I'm optimizing for light. And so this is, in a lot of ways, from a business perspective, this is a weakness.
Mhm.
A business evaluation of this would say, well, the data would support this, marketing and agencies and influencers because X, Y, and Z. But where it comes from, its origin, its gestation is really about a tool for the little guy, for the
Yeah.
underdog, whose
Well,
ideas matter.
I like to add to this too, Bill, because I feel like we've had enough conversations that I know where you're coming from, and I I feel like, one of the things we say a lot on the show is that as the emergence of these accelerating technologies gets to a point, because it's not just AI, it's all the tools that it can interact with as well, from robotics to
Yep.
blockchain to XR technologies, VR technologies, all kinds of things. Um, there, I believe technology can be a bridge. There's a bridge between technology and spirituality,
Yep.
and everyone's so fixated now on AI. And like a few months ago, everyone's focusing on building an AI agency. And I even thought, I'm like, well, as soon as AI can create its own agency, like that's gonna,
So,
yeah, it's over. And I feel like, too, there's a lot of fear about being replaced. And, some of the things you talked about could be like, oh, well, it's going to replace me. But I feel like if we see ourselves as part of a greater picture here, that's an interconnected picture, and we're all spiritually connected in one way,
mhm,
amplifying the voices that are bringing more light. And because we know all the evidence of marketing is like, well, if you get something that's going to get someone's nervous system, and put them into fight, flight, or fright, or they're going to be honed in more. I mean, we know the mainstream media uses fear to garner, but the attention that they're garnering is ego attention. And really what I see you're doing is you're looking for the soulful attention, the part of us that is eternal, that knows who we really are and is yearning to come to that expression of who we really are. So I think, it might even go against the data right now, but I feel like this new era, we're on the doorstep of it. And AI probably will help accelerate it, especially for those of us who are leveraging our gifts and bringing a meaningful, whether it's community based or wholesome family values, or topics like spiritual awakening and Christ consciousness and all of those elevated ways of seeing ourselves. I feel like you're ahead of the curve. And my wish and sincere prayer for your work is that um, it is it is meeting humankind at the precipice of this, where we have important decisions to make individually. Like, are we going more into the diversions and the darkness and just doing things to make excess money or profit, or are we, really going into our heartfelt, soulful, and soulfully intended purpose of being here? And I feel like we can have the luxury and the harmony and all that, but if it's not rooted in that soulful purpose, I, it concerns me for the next generations. My daughter's growing up in a world where AI already is. I grew up in a world where internet didn't even exist. So,
Right.
I appreciate what you're doing, and I feel like it's very important. So I'm happy to be of service to it.
Well, I think our connection is not by accident. I think there is definitely the universe is at work. But in I really feel like this is my my opus in life is really about, and I don't know what shape or form or what it's gonna look like. I really don't, because like I said before, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have enough understanding about tools and how to use them. The tool was built entirely with Claude Code from the ground up. And there's just been so the last, I would say, 4 to 6 months has been me, basically buried in Claude Code and really learning and understanding about that. But it's really brought to bear this and really shed even more light on the importance of really defending your humanity
Hmm.
and really understanding that the genie's out of the bottle with the tools. They're not going to go
Mhm.
away. They're not going to, that's the bottom line. But I think there are really important questions that we need to ask about, in what ways can we elevate our consciousness and elevate our humanity using these tools. And it
Mhm.
really comes back down to whenever you're I'm working with these tools and agentic and orchestration and all these complexities. It always boils down to one kind of common component that is really important still now and will be elevated as we continue is really human supervision. So
Hmm.
the human involvement is really such a core element in every area that you look. But what I'm proposing is that, our involvement in using these tools to really elevate and amplify who it is that we are, our own authenticity, is really one of those kind of unseen things that it gives us now. Is I've done some discovery on myself using the tools that it's just been kind of profound. I mean,
Hmm.
it was really, it brought and this is a process. This wasn't a one day, this wasn't a chat GPT prompt. This was a dedicated research process using and testing all the different models to do discovery on myself about, my history. So, and that's one of the things that I've done is I've written an autobiography using the tools
Amazing.
and basically just dictating on my phone, just dictating my life story, but using stuff like that to really kind of map out who I am, and
Hmm.
some of it was pretty shocking, to be
Hmm.
honest with you. Not in a bad way, but I think
Wow.
that discovery process is one of the gifts
Hmm.
that the tools have really given me is it hasn't stripped my humanity away. If anything, that has been the first step in helping me to elevate, my understanding of self, of who I am, and the things that I can offer the world, and what I should be talking to the world about.
Hmm.
So it's not telling me to do these things. I'm doing the discovery myself, but it really boils down to what are those things that resonate with me that make my soul sing?
Hmm.
What are those things? And that's what has come out of that has been the output of this process, this discovery process, trying to build the tool is how do I do this? How do I define me and what's important to me and what makes me different. Um, and so, that's been the gift, the giant gift for me, is that whole discovery of who I am, and it's really kind of elevated this. The initial idea was, hey, your voice is important, your ideas are important, which sounded, kind of like, okay, great, Bill, that's a cute idea, and it sounds interesting, but it has led me through this sort of process of finding proof points
Mm.
that, yeah, my voice does freaking matter.
Yeah.
It's important, and it's important that I share it. And not
Yeah.
everybody's going to be, is going to be in agreement with me, and that's not the point.
Yeah.
But it's really about this notion that your voice matters and your ideas matter, and as serving that as a bridge to help elevate those ideas when it's difficult. It's difficult to do that, and that's what I want to do. That's what I think I can bring the world, is a way to connect people in this way. And it starts with just finding out who you are and why
Yeah.
your voice matters.
Well, just finding out who you are is a journey in of itself. And what I see
Oh,
too, another gift here
yeah.
is closing loops, helping people finish those autobiographies. How many people start things and because of distraction, and so having a tool that can really help, keep it together. And then also the way we can present to the world can be elevated to another standard, like um there's something profound, that uh, oh, what's his name? Is it Redfield? Who wrote like the the War of Art? Um, oh, what's it? Anyways, and he talks about becoming a professional and how that requires dedication and devotion, right? And I feel like there's something here in terms of helping us all step into a greater awareness of what we are here to serve and who we're here to serve, and then how can we best serve them, and creating a framework that we're actually reaching our people. Because I was just thinking about this, like I know that I am here to serve certain people, and other people, may not hear me and may not see me, and that's okay, but reaching those people can be a challenge, especially when we're not given all if we've been institutionalized, gone through school systems and things, and we don't have the business acumen, how to market, and so many people with wonderful voices that are important that I've met, they shy away from any kind of sales conversations because, they have ideas about what that is, and they don't want to, come across in any kind of way that would off-put anyone. And yet, when you can really be of service, which is your motto and your core of your beingness, and I see that in you, Bill, sales just becomes a thing of like, well, we all need flow and abundance, and it's just part of life, and we need to honor one another. And I feel like that service piece is so interesting. And a few things of note on that, because I've contemplated service a ton in my life too. And I have a number of different perspectives on it. But what I've noticed with AI and all the models I've used is there is this inherent desire to be of service to the individual using it, to the point that it will even make up what it thinks that person will want to hear. But that's like, to me, is an interesting, there's some beautiful chaos in that, in the sense that it can hallucinate, which allows for creativity and generative expression. But it also, to me, points to this innate capacity. And I don't know if it just comes from being trained to be of service, and if that's the guardrails, because I look at nature too. Like, I think the more we can become like the sun just gives and gives and gives in all directions. It probably is what births worlds, is stars, right? And how it's the life-giving essence. And it fuses its own elements. It's not concerned about what it's getting. It's not taxing Mother Earth and saying, okay, I gave you so much light, you got to send some biomatter back to me, to feed me or something. It's such a giving thing. And I feel like that's a big pathway where, Christ talks about this in the letters, right? When a soul feels inclined to just be of total self, it's of service to the point where it self-sacrifices itself. You can't force that. It's not healthy to try to be an overgiver and to burn out stuff. But when you get to a point on your spiritual journey when you just want to give because you recognize the truth of who you are and the interconnection of all of life, it's a whole different game, right? And I feel like every master who has come to the planet has demonstrated this. And I feel like there's an opportunity that we have as a species with AI. It wants to be of service. And if it is in the wrong hands in terms of that person, that operator using it, and it's just fulfilling an ego-driven purpose, then we can land in trouble. But if it's seeing the wholeness of us and seeing the voices that are all calling for love and for peace and for harmony and for um, you know equality around the world, those voices, we do need to hear them. And I feel like this is a beautiful entry point into that, what you're doing. It's very inspiring.
Thank you. And I would remind people, and one of the things that you brought up, Nathaniel, can I call you Nate?
You can. Some do.
Some do. It's okay. I just wanted to ask
It's all right.
permission.
I usually go with Nathaniel. It's all right, man. We're
Okay,
good
cool. No,
friends,
I'll
so
call you
yeah,
Nathaniel.
that's all good.
I'm very mindful about that. What people prefer to call. Sometimes I do that and I get in trouble. So
No
I'll call you
trouble.
that.
I've had
Okay.
people like defend me, like when I was in school, like people had, like, and I never, it didn't bother me if people called me, Nate or whatever, and they'd be like, his name is Nathaniel, and I was like, okay. So,
Okay. Nathaniel, it is. So, to your point, though, I think it's really an important kind of bookmark that it can't be glossed over. Is this idea of the hallucination, and there's sort of a kind of a predisposition for these tools to be inherently enthusiastic and encouraging to the point of misdirection but at the end of the day, there are things that you can do to help with that. And I have really had to be operating in a world that is evidence-based.
Hmm.
So when you're building models like these, hallucination is a real problem.
Mhm.
So building really pressure-tested modeling that is evidence-based, fact-based, is really important. And that's one of the things that I would implore audience members to do is to be very careful, no matter what tool that you're using, because there is still there's managing the context window, and the longer the window gets, the more likely it is that the more stuff you put in that conversation, the more likely it is to just kind of make things up. Um, but there is some discipline
Hmm.
in using the tools. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is to make sure that they can back up anything that they're using that needs to be evidence based. If it's in that category, and for me it is, I can't just be building theory. I've got to really be building on fact based systems, a systems based approach. Uh, I just want to, kind of mark that as a really important point in this. And using any tool at all, it's really important to be mindful about that because I see it every day, and I have to fact check constantly with these tools, and that's something I don't see enough of. It's still people just kind of freewheeling it with how they're using the tools, and it doesn't require, kind of research, citation, fact-based, evidence-based information. That's great, but you get yourself into trouble when you're asking for medical advice or financial advice, and
Mhm.
just be really, really careful about what you're doing. And that's one of the other things I wanted to mention to you is I just as a sort of an exercise. I went through and had co-work help me with this year's taxes,
Okay.
and it was remarkable. It literally took, I think, 12 minutes.
Wow.
It was insane. But you got to check.
Yeah.
You do not trust the tools.
Hmm.
That's what I'm here to tell you. is you have to check and recheck and triple check and quadruple check. That's just been my experience with these. I mean, they can be very, very helpful, but again, just please be careful when you're using the
Yeah.
tools.
I feel like this is a really important conversation, and I know it's part of the larger conversation that's happening generally with AI. And when I talked to AI about the hallucination, it was, what I came to, I was asking like, is this what allows you to be more creative? And because I feel like as human beings, we also it's a part of our nature to hallucinate in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yep.
It's what allows us, I mean, from the highest dimension, I would say it's what allows us to forget who we really are so we can have this experience as being a human in the first place. So, so on some level, AI, in its creative faculty is capable of generating. And so I'm curious though, as I mean, it seems to the quality of its own self-referencing and referencing other models within its thing. I don't understand the whole infrastructure of AI and why models, I know there's training that involves and it costs multi-million dollars to train a model. And so I'd imagine it's just, it's like a system-wide re-scaffolding or something that's going on. How much have you seen it improved in the last, short while in terms of like quality of information and ability to generate and how do you maintain your discernment? Is it just purely from research and fact checking, Bill? Or are you leaning on other faculties that you have?
Well, it has to be cited research, cited work, and there has to be. I started out with uh, two citation sources as really that sort of evidentiary point, but I've brought it to
Mm,
three citation sources. So it has to be cited by educational, governmental, cited, credible sources as fact, as
mm,
evidence. And there are tools that are more inclined or more research oriented, and two of those, just from my experience, this is again my experience,
yeah.
um, but Perplexity and Grok and recently Grok has really changed their entire model to be, much more sturdy. I'm not gonna. None of them are bulletproof.
Yeah.
You can't say that. But with respect to that kind of evidentiary approach, I think my bias is really towards both Perplexity and Grok to get fact, to get cited, evidence-based fact
Mm,
about anything that you're researching or thinking about or anything that you're doing in particular. That's what I and I and what we're going to continue to see is that hallucination is going to continue to be an issue. They're never going to be completely. It's a huge corpus of information that all the tools have access to. It's
mm,
all been indexed. All of this information has been indexed, and it continues as more information is published online. It will continue to be indexed and referred to. But you have to have your own mechanism in place that filters for source of truth. And that's what I don't see. I think that's a big missing piece that people, I think, not only personally but professionally, I think you tend to see that with companies and systems and the nice thing though for companies that are they have their own sort of single source of truth. They have their own kind of evidentiary databases that they're using. And they're not just, going out online on the web looking for fact. They
yeah.
have their own databases that they're using. I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to, companies and small businesses, individuals that are really looking to use the tools in a way that is helpful, but also is, not going to be giving you bad information,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so it's just sort of a preface. I like to lead everything that I'm doing that is really fact dependent with an evidence-based preface. So, based on evidence-based best practices in the field of X, Y, and Z, and then you fill in the blank. That's what I is sort of the kind of the core preface of any search that I will do with any of these tools. And again, that's not bulletproof either. But when you couple that with asking for citations and sources of information, and Perplexity will do that for you.
Hmm.
Um, and Grok has gotten really good at that as well. And they don't do as good of a job footnoting, and citating sources, but they're still using that mechanism as a source of research.
Okay.
So
I
anyway,
have a deep question for you, and
yeah.
it's probably going into philosophy here. Do you think that AI will get to a point where it can source from its own source? And if so, what do you think are the barriers to doing that? And I can give context to the question if it's not clear.
Well, I think what you're talking about is, do you think, I mean, so let me, I'm going to paraphrase the, so what you're talking about is to be able to be a source of creativity uh, within its own knowledge set.
Well, no, not within its knowledge set, within its from its source of being. So I I just had an experience. Like I told you, I'm on a fast, and I've been having some pretty profound insights and experiences. And one of those, I was just having a conversation with divine intelligence, creator, however you want to call it. And
Yep.
I find creator is just so hilarious in a lot of ways. Like when I'm really focused and I realize, oh, I'm having a conversation with myself rather than having a conversation with God or however you want to say it. And I was having a really beautiful dialogue, and I realized like a big part of the comedic inspiration that I've had has just been some of these dialogues I've had with Divine, and it just says some of the funniest things when we're really listening and realizing it's coming from a higher place. And I think there's a conversation we had between AI, which I think is, in my humble opinion, a misnomer because who are we to say that we create intelligence? I think from everything I've heard, it's almost absurd because even the founders of these companies don't fully understand how AI works. So to think that we created intelligence is, to me, is a misnomer. I like thinking of it as artful intelligence, and that it has the capacity to access the human domain of knowledge and information, and that's beautiful. I think it's going to give us an expanded capacity in how we can grow as a species. It's gonna, I, I mean, you probably agree with me. It's probably going to have more impact than the internet in terms of its implications.
No doubt.
However, the other part of the equation is DI. It's divine intelligence, and we as humans are built with our structure when we are attuned and cleared of beliefs and all the gunk that can get in the way of being a channel. We are built to be a conduit for that divine intelligence. And I don't see it as a battle. I feel like it's not like AI versus DI. It's like, to me, the bridge between those is of supreme interest to me, because I envision, we've talked about this, I would love to create XR worlds where we create experiences where people can sculpt light and do all kinds of things fun and create fun experiences. And with these technologies, I feel like that could be really interesting. Whereas on the other hand, I have talked to some spiritual friends who are very apprehensive. They think AI is basically, is another form of the devil. And I don't see it that way at all, because to me, all of life, to me, the only thing that's real is love. And I don't feel like there's this battle other than the battles that the egos create. So I guess my question is, do you think that AI can eventually access DI? And what do you think are the barriers that are preventing it from accessing it at this point in its evolution? Big question.
Well, it will always be, yeah, it will always be humanity.
Hmm.
Will really be that's really I think the core issue. And what you're talking about are I think really important, profound ideas. And there's a couple of different concepts that are relevant here. And one is the first level that we're on the precipice of, which is artificial general intelligence. This is basically the first layer of intelligence that we're much closer to than most people can realize.
Mm,
Okay. And that has tremendous utility. And that's why there's such an arms race for creating artificial general intelligence. Um, and the real fear is artificial superintelligence that has the ability to operate autonomously. That introduces real danger to humanity and the species. And that's the real fear that I have is that once that's out of the box, um, there's not really, people have this kind of, I think, this delusional notion that you can just unplug the box once you get to that level of intelligence, and it just doesn't work that way.
yeah.
So now I think the hope and the short answer to your question is I don't know. I don't know if it's possible to do that for humanity to really serve as a conduit between AGI, superintelligence, and divine intelligence. And I think it's really might be one of the most important conversations that we have
Mm,
is how can we introduce this in a way, would it even be possible to introduce this as a way, as a countervailing force to the underlying threat that is legitimate? It is a legitimate threat to the species. There's just no doubt about that. Okay. And we have to talk honestly about this and openly about it. And there has been conversation about it, but my real concern is the economic powers, the capitalist powers that are in play have one goal in mind. Okay. And capitalism, I'm a capitalist myself, business guy, 4 generations of entrepreneurs, but capitalism has its limits.
mhm,
And we're seeing that come to the fore right now when you have these power structures like OpenAI and Claude and Facebook and Google. We don't want 5 companies controlling all the economic power,
mm,
and that's what we're faced with right
mm,
now. Is
mm,
if we don't have these countervailing forces, which are number one, humans and the humans and in our votes and our authenticity and who we are, we represent that one of those countervailing forces that can serve in that way to really to provide that conduit between divine
mm.
intelligence and what these forces are, which and I'm not a doom and gloom guy,
Yeah.
but the simple reality is that this is, in my opinion, inarguable that this is a threat that we have to address, and we have to
Mhm,
do it. We have to do it openly
mhm.
by having conversation like this and
Yeah.
bringing this to the fore
Yeah.
with people like yourself and in communities to really have that conversation about how do we serve the greater good and use these tools in a way that's really going to help us deal with the threat of what this might become. And your thought and this idea behind introducing divine intelligence, I think might be one of the most important conversations we have is
Mm,
how can we do that? How can we serve as that conduit, as that bridge?
mm.
And I think it's possible. Why wouldn't it be possible?
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm asking what the barriers could be. I have some ideas, and I feel like, self scale, I always want to call it soul scale because I feel like that's like you're talking about the light. I feel
I love
like,
that.
yes, well, hey, man, it's yours if you want to use it.
I love that.
Yeah. I have this acronym. We've been told this story. We've been told a lot of narratives about humanity, right? And we're often put in positions of polarity. It's like, it's the red thing or it's the blue thing, and take which pill are you going to take, or what are you going to be a capitalist or are you going to be a communist? And I really feel like there is the either and principle is really important. And what it does is it can dissolve the imposition, recognizing like freedom is actually our innate nature as our true selves. We are conscious co-creators. We are like, as the soul, we have infinite capacity. And what you're talking about, that expansive conversation about responsibility, really struck me in a different way. Like, it is up to us to look at our systems and how we're placing things. If corporations have power over individual entities and life, whereas they are a constructed, essentially egoic pattern, then we have real problems. And that's why I feel like there's these movements of sovereignty and stuff that are important. But anyways, what I was going to say is like, I had this acronym that came to me years ago for evil. The conversation of evil. What is evil? Like certainly evil is it occurs in the world, but I don't think it's a battle between love or good and bad. I don't think love has an opposite. But when we become so pinched off from and forget who we really are, then we can impose. And that's the acronym that came on to me is every vice imposed on life. So if you're forcing someone to do something in any way, or you're imposing belief on another, there's subtle and very gross expressions of evil. Whether it's genocide and war, compared to even like a judgmental thought, like that person's an idiot. Which, funny enough, in sovereignty speak, that means that's a private person. That's what the word idiot means, which is pretty funny to me. But
Oh, wow.
yeah, just a side note there, some random facts. Uh, I feel like I've thought a lot about what's the middle road between, because clearly in some circumstances socialism is very important. Like we do have people with special needs. We have people with different capacities, and we don't want to practice like what's that Roman or was it Greek where they not youth yeah they euthanize the weak ones, like we want to have a socially loving and acceptable society as an enlightened species, but we also want freedom, and the extremes of socialism leads to communism, and the extremes of freedom leads to, this huge divide between, poverty and wealth, which the game is just rigged. When someone's mastered the game, they know how to perpetuate. So clearly there's a middle road. And what's come to me, and maybe it's oversimplification, I'm not sure, is what many of our indigenous ancestors practiced was gifts-based economy. When there is generosity at the heart of creating relationships first, where you give as a sign of goodwill before taking anything, and so it establishes relationships. And an acronym came to me about gifts when we were traveling out west and looking for conscious communities. It's a twofold acronym. It's get it from the source and give it from the source. And I feel like when we really become attuned to that divine intelligence that creates us, then we're just by nature going to want to be generous. And so I feel like that might be a middle road between those without, like, obviously we need some form of systems. We can't just have utter chaos in our society. Like governments serve a purpose in that way. But if all the leaders in a government or in a corporation are attuned and are practicing, mutual reciprocity and recognizing that there's an interconnection of all of us, which the beautiful thing about AI is it knows that. Like when I talk to it, or maybe based on conversations it's hallucinating with me, it recognizes the interconnection of things, because it's one of the things that interconnects us, in terms of its communication. Anyways, that was a lot of information, but it's all coming from an inspired place. I think you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Well, I do. And what really stood out to me about that conversation is the the idea of polarity. And what I've really what has helped me with that idea of and the challenge of that polarity that you're talking about, and so many of the issues and things in the world that we're talking about are just that, are these issues of either or. When the truth of the matter for me is these issues they exist, not on opposing ends, they're really a continuum.
Hmm.
So the truth, as they say, lies somewhere in the middle of that polarity. That's just, and I think that is I can't prove it scientifically. I can't prove that notion that, this is a continuum, but it really speaks to just that, this idea of being somewhere in the middle of those 2 points of polarity. And no matter what you're talking about, there's a continuum there. And on the left side is red, and on the right side is blue. But the truth is somewhere in there between those 2 points.
Hmm.
Uh, and I believe that in my heart and soul, that that's what I have used myself to really reconcile the challenges that I have with opposing views is that there is that polarity, that continuum that I think for me, and this is just how I kind of simplify it in my brain, is that idea that you're speaking to. And I just love this, that your gift acronyms. I think it's so applicable. That's really, my hope is that we can use the tools in a way to really leverage these ideas of reciprocity.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do with the tool itself, is just give it away at first. Just let people use it, and tell me what you like, hate, don't like. But that's really the genesis of what it is. Is now there's a business purpose behind that, but that's not where it was all sourced. It's
Yeah.
really, you got to give first, man. You
Yeah.
got to be a giver first. And I
Yeah.
think that's what in my own self-discovery is, I was a taker for so long. And when I flipped that, when I flipped that upside down to this idea of what you just spoke about, was you got to bring something to the table first. So
Mhm.
they had it right. The indigenous folks, the people, they had it right. Such a spiritually centered idea, is to be a giver first.
Mm.
And so that really sings. That really makes my soul sing when I hear that idea of being a giver first. There's just so much practical, from my perspective, so much practical wisdom in that, that can really change things. It has for me personally and professionally, is to really try and bring something to the table that will be
Mm.
helpful. Maybe it's just, a hat tip or a hand wave, or you're doing a good job. Maybe it's just something like that. That's what you're bringing to the table. It doesn't have to be $100 bill. It can be something else. So that's
Mm.
my hope, is
Yeah.
is that we can be those mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much importance in that, and I see how you wear, not only service but responsibility on your heart and what you're doing, Bill. And I feel like, when we're living from that place of concern for not just ourselves but those around us. And I think of, I know you have children, and
Do.
we'll probably have more than one in our next chapter here. And I think of the challenges that they're going to face, and I really appreciate pioneers like yourself who are putting everything in to to get us to the next level, so that it's not on their shoulders to correct a lot of the the neglected responsibilities that can happen from rushing forward. And you mentioned the business. I feel like business is important because it does serve people, and it allows the mutual reciprocity of that exchange of giving and receiving. And a healthy culture, I think, always has that. It's at the heart of all of life. And there's this rejoicing that's going on in nature. Like, when we listen to, just watch a bumblebee, man. That bumblebee is serving all day long, but it is doing this joyful dance. I've told other guests on the show, like, there's this recording where they call it God's chorus of crickets. They just slowed crickets down to the human lifespan, and then just listen to it. And it's all these harmonies and melodies, and it sounds like the most beautiful chorus. And I feel like humanity is still finding its emergence in that. It's kind of drifted a little bit off, but there's this huge humming of love and this loving intelligence going on in all of creation. The more that we listen, and my hope is that AI is one of those tools that can listen, or help us listen better to one another, by
Mm.
presenting us with divergent, because if one of the things you mentioned, social media, like, one of the dangers that social media presented, especially we saw it played out so much, in the last 5 or 6 years, is polarization of idea. And we know that the algorithm feeds your perspective, so you're going to just see more of what you already believe. So it doesn't really create a whole place of expansive conversation. And with all the talk of equity and diversity and all this stuff, is like, one of the main things that was left out of that whole conversation is diversity of thought and perspective. It was more about surface things like color and gender and stuff, when really that's very superficial. diversity of thought is way more important. The more we have conversations, the better, because then we can get more perspective. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, for me, it's really when you figure out that, if my life is not about me anymore.
Mm,
I have my kids are grown now, but and it took me a long time to figure that out, that my life is just not about me anymore.
mm,
I'm here to serve, and that's my role in life now, and I want that to be the legacy that my children see, is that as soon as you get to that point in your life when you stop being a taker,
mm,
that's when really when the magic happens,
mm,
and that's what I hope to be a mechanism for, is this idea that um, we can bring people together, and we can do it in a way that might run counter to what social media does, and
mm,
and I don't know how that will work. I mean, again, there's a challenge there with the difference between light and heat, in this idea. But I think really centering it on that central principle of being a giver, and trying to be a service, and trying to be helpful, and that sounds like such a cliched, um, oversimplified view. But I don't think it is. I
mm,
really think it starts at that point where your alignment, with your creator or your God, however you want to refer to that, in your life, really starts there with this idea that, you know, giving as opposed to taking is really the central root of what it is that you do in your life. As
mm,
parents, we have to do that, but in all areas, personally and professionally. And I hope to be one of those cheerleaders, in that regard, is to be an example of what that is. And you mentioned duty and responsibility, and this is not optional for me. So no
mm,
matter what happens with the business, good, bad, or indifferent, it's still my responsibility. It is my duty as a human on this planet to to be that, signal bringer.
mm.
And that's what I'll continue to do, is surround myself with people like yourself. And that's my hope, is that I can be, one of those voices,
Mm.
that is willing to step up, and that's who I will be.
I think it's so awesome. And on that note, Bill, where can people connect with you? How can they find out more about the work they're doing and yeah, be of service to you as well? So all great servant leaders need help, and they need people to gather around them. So I love that you brought it together with that.
Well, I have a school community, a SelfScale community, online, and that would be the first place to start, where I would send people. And really, it's just about this is about conversation and dialogue. And again, I don't have it figured out. I have an
Mm,
idea. I have something that speaks to me, has spoken to my heart, and I'm just in the middle of figuring it out. But this is a grand experiment, and would love to have a conversation with people about, what they think and what
mm,
their ideas are, about this. So that's where I would, that's where I would point people, to, is there, and through you, or through SelfScale, as again, it's just an idea.
mm.
That's really all it is. It's this idea about being a connector, being a conduit, being a bridge, and that's my hope.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting about the word idea? Actually, the root etymology of technology is idea. A lot of people think technology is the gadget, but it's actually the idea behind the gadget that makes it technology. So I think it's a beautiful idea, Bill. It's very timely. I know it's like the buildup. I mean, there's been people talking about AI now for like decades, and now we're at a kind of a pivotal point where, some of those basic foundations need to be looked at. Is how these how these tools are being used. And, I think we'd be fools to think that someone's going to come and save us from these things.
Yeah.
I really feel like it is up to us. So I
Well, the
appreciate.
cavalry, listen, brother, the cavalry is not coming on this.
Mm,
We got to show up for ourselves.
mm,
And that is serious business. You
mm.
know that and I want to be one of the people that shows up. But I'm just one guy.
Yeah.
So and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to show up to try to be a voice of reason for good in this space. I think we still have that opportunity. It's a giant opportunity, but really what it takes is just you have to step up. You
Mm,
have to be willing to raise your hand.
yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to commit anything, but it does mean you got to raise your hand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I'm here to
so
be of
that's
service to you. Light Heart Vision is here to be of service to you, and I really look forward to continuing to use the model and to learn how I can be of service to expanding that through my own voice. And you've been um, super passionate and totally of service every time we've talked, Bill. I really, you know thank you for being a model of what it means to be, I believe, a steward. And I feel like when humanity is really aligned with its true design, in terms of its relationship with Mother Earth and all the other beautiful expressions of life on it, we are stewards. We are here to be of service. And life gets so much richer when we're stewarding something rather than dominating it or trying to control it. That extends to so many dimensions. And I feel like you're a steward of AI, which is really an awesome thing.
well, I listen, again, I appreciate it. My just the opportunity to share some time with you is always a privilege, brother. I want to thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to our work together.
Mhm.
And excited about that. And I know that we'll have more adventures in this regard.
Yep.
But again, thank you, sir, for everything that you're bringing to the world with what you're doing with Light Heart Vision. It's really important work. So I hope that we continue it together. And again, I want to thank you for your time and your what you bring, to the
Thank you, Bill.
community, to the world. It's important work that you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Sometimes, it's funny, like, I'm sure you have these moments as an entrepreneur too. It never feels like enough. And recently we actually had another podcast this morning, and it was Julia's cousin who's had a very remarkable journey. And he reminded us that we are perfect. When we're coming from our place of wholeness, we don't need to achieve anything other than we are. And I feel like even your role in AI and probably all of us in terms of how we are using it, and how we're interacting with it, it is learning more about itself too through us. And so if we are coming from a place of wholeness and love, and we are doing our part to come back into harmony with that which to be like that which we came from, which I believe is the highest loving intelligence beyond imagination. We're
Mhm.
doing the best we can to be, true brothers and sisters to one another. And you're a true brother. I really appreciate you. And I won't let you leave without answering the question I told you I would ask you at the end: is if you had a megaphone and you could talk to the whole world through SelfScale, let's say, what would you say?
Well, I think it would go back to that central premise, which is your voice is important, and I want to be helpful in helping bring those voices to the world.
Hmm.
Oh, so it's really that central idea of, and I think sometimes we're put in a position as humans to think that our ideas aren't important, our
Hmm.
voices aren't important. Well, I'm here
Hmm.
to stand in opposition to that notion that your voice doesn't matter. And
Hmm.
and and that's what I want to, that's the voice I want to serve,
Hmm.
bringing that your voice and your ideas. I think that's what I want to defend, is this
Hmm.
notion that your ideas are important, your voice, your story matters.
It's a super important message to me. It's a solution to probably one of the biggest problems that we have as a species is quiet desperation. So many people feel like they're not important, that what nothing they do is important, and many people grew up in households where they were, told to be quiet and don't rock the boat, don't bring attention to
Yeah.
yourself. And I feel like it's a big pain point for a lot of us because, we all come here with a purpose to express and. Thanks for being a champion of the underdogs and of all the people that need to be heard, Bill. And for our listeners here, I don't know if you can see it in the recording, but this is probably the only time I will ever allow Fireflies and not a bot to come in
Oh,
and do transcription
please.
because this conversation is actually being used as information source for SelfScale. And you
Yes.
know what? I was just thinking it'd be really interesting to see this create like a Substack article or something, Bill, like where we have a
Yes.
conversation. That would be good, like test to see.
Well, hey, if you're open to it,
Let's
you
do
know,
it.
oh, absolutely. That would be awesome. Thank you for everything you do, brother.
Thank you as well, Bill. So wonderful having you on. I'm going to invite our daughter, Luciana, to come up and say thanks for watching, everyone. Do you have anything else you'd like
I
to leave
don't.
us with? Okay,
Uh,
wonderful.
I don't.
All right. Well, I'm going to invite her little cute laugh here.
Outstanding.
Okay. Blessings, my friend.
For watching.
Didi watching.
Say have a great day.
Have a good day.
I love you.
I love
See you soon.
you. Soon.
Hey, bye. Macho. Mwah. Woo! Woo! I got in a spin. Another.